from ABC News. A television event. 100 years in the making. The century.
When we went to the airport in Paris, we knew that we were getting on a flight that might be dangerous. February the 1st, 1979. The Ayatollah Khomeini was leaving his exile in France. He had helped to start a revolution, and now he was going home to lead it. Home to Iran. There was a handful of journalists on board. We were all frightened. We wondered if the Iranian Air Force would shoot us down when we got to Iran the next morning.
In a way, we were Khomeini's first hostages, and we knew it. We knew that this was a dangerous flight.
In Tehran, the anticipation was extraordinary. The place was in chaos.
Everyone was out in the street.
There were millions of people waiting. As we entered Iranian airspace, I asked the Ayatollah the question. Would you tell us how you feel about being back in Iran? The Ayatollah said, I feel nothing.
Tonight on The Century, the evolution of revolution.
Good evening, and welcome to The Century one more time. I'm Peter Jennings. I do have to remind my children from time to time that many of the events in this series actually happened before my time as a reporter. But tonight's episode is about an event I covered. I spent much of the 1970s reporting on the Middle East. And when American diplomats were swept up in the Iranian Revolution, I already knew many of the players quite well. Tonight's episode is important because the Iranian Revolution is also central to the larger century-long story. For it was there in Tehran that we encountered a real shift in world affairs. In Iran, the progressive notions of 20th century America came face to face with the 7th century certainties of Islam.
When did people first tell you that torture was going on in Iran?
In matter of fact, we heard it mostly from the outside. The inside, they would never come to me and say, well, sir, we have tortured this fellow to make him talk. No.
Do you, as King of Kings, do you accept a sense of responsibility for those tortures?
I was receiving the head of the security, say, twice a week. And he will have his reports on important things to me, not just petty details like that.
When the Shah of Iran gave his last interview, he was dying in exile. At home, his country was in the middle of an Islamic revolution. The Shah was surprised. I think he loved his country very much, but he said that torture was a petty detail. This is the story of the revolution, told by the Iranians and Americans whose lives became entangled in the autumn of 1979 when Islamic revolutionaries seized the U.S. Embassy.
I was against surrendering the embassy because I'd never learned how to surrender in all the military schools I've been to.
After 20 years, I still don't think that what we did was wrong. Americans are very angry at what we did. We understand that. Even then we understood it, but we had to do it. We had no other choice.
And events just took on a life of their own, as events sometimes do.
We were all so confused when this happened. Maybe we should go back first to see how it got started. Back almost 30 years before the Islamic Revolution to 1953. This is the Shah. Back then, he was a vigorous young monarch, the son of an army colonel, and that is him, who became Shah, or king himself, when he overthrew a 100-year-old royal dynasty the old man sent his son to school in Switzerland. He returned with something of a playboy image, an Iranian prince who seemed very European.
I think also in his young life he was inspired by many of the principles that progressive, modern and democratic societies had, taking Switzerland as an example where he was.
The Shah's prime minister was a man named Mohammad Mossadegh, fairly elderly as you can see. Here they are shaking hands. Mossadegh, by the way, isn't as loyal as he looks. Not long after this, he tried to overthrow the Shah. Mossadegh had a lot of support in Iran. There were mass demonstrations calling for the Shah to step down. Things got so dangerous, the Shah left the country. But some of Mossadegh's supporters were Iranian communists, and so the CIA got involved. Soon, men with suitcases of money were in Iran to overthrow Mossadegh. The operation was run by Kermit Roosevelt, a grandson of Teddy Roosevelt. He was assisted by General Norman Schwarzkopf, Sr., not Junior.
One thing that the CIA was good at in those days was organizing opposition groups. General Schwarzkopf's dad went in there with Kermit Roosevelt and handed out money to pro-Shah demonstrators and assisted in the ouster of Mohammad Mossadegh and the return of the Shah to the power.
For many years before he became a hostage in the U.S. Embassy, Colonel Chuck Scott traveled back and forth to Iran, arranging arms sales for Washington. It didn't take him long to understand that everyone in Iran knew about the CIA's role in overthrowing Mossadegh.
From that day on, the people of Iran believed, basically as an article of faith, that the United States was behind the Shah, so therefore the Shah was a puppet of the United States, and we were jointly and severally responsible for all of the Shah's failings, shortcomings, and excesses.
The Shah was in Rome when it happened. Someone handed him a news bulletin telling him Mossadegh had been arrested. He put on a military uniform and went home. So why did the United States get involved? Oil is why. Iranian oil. For America, it was all about the oil and stopping anyone connected with the Soviet Union from controlling it. 20 years later, 1972, this is the Shah with President Nixon. America was still worried about the Soviet Union and the oil fields. On this occasion, Nixon was coming to make the Shah an offer. Be America's military guardian in the Persian Gulf, and we'll allow you to buy pretty much any non-nuclear weapon that you want.
We were stretched thin in Vietnam. Nixon ended the discussion by looking across the table at the Shah and saying, "Protect me," which was pretty amazing for a president of the United States to be saying to the Shah of Iran.
The Shah really liked being such an important ally. During the Nixon visit, he insisted that I go out to see his Navy on patrol. The future of the Persian Gulf is tinged with uneasiness. Russia continues her buildup in neighboring Iraq. The West continues to bank her money and arms on Iran. The Shah was modernizing Iran at an incredible rate. He loved to show reporters his big projects, like dams he had built to bring electrical power to the rural villages. But I always felt as though visiting Iran was like visiting two competing countries, one impatient to push forward quickly, the other deeply attached to the values of Islam formed in the 7th century. That was the Shah's challenge. By the mid-1970s, North Tehran, the Iranian capital, looked a little like Las Vegas at night. The money from oil had attracted all kinds of people who wanted to sell Iran stuff, including, if they could, an American way of life.
In those days, you could see women wearing miniskirts, hot pants, looking sexy, going out into the streets. There were discotheques, there were bars.
There were almost 50,000 Americans living in Iran now, working for American companies or the American military. They mingled with the elite Iranians whose connections to the Shah and big American companies had made them rich. When the government built a television network, there was Western-style music and dancing coming in everybody's living rooms. In the late 1970s, America was selling its culture everywhere, and this is what it looked like in Iran.
For some people, it was good. For others, they didn't know what it was about. They felt it as a rape of the culture.
In the mid-1970s, this was South Tehran. Kabi Golistan was taking pictures there. Here you could see the other side of the Iranian oil boom. Hundreds of thousands of poor farmers from the rural villages who'd come looking for work building the Shah's new modern cities. This is where we really saw that Iran was two countries. In South Tehran, the people were also more conservative. There were no hot pants here. Women still wore the black chador.
Suddenly, they're being bombarded with modern communication. The excesses on television, the films that show the wonderful life of fantastically rich people in northern Tehran, and they could know that no matter what they did under that system, they were excluded from partaking of any of that. Does that breed a revolution? They had no reason at all, economically or socially, to be loyal to the old system. The old system was telling them, you are dirt. The only thing you are good for is to build houses and apartments for the rich.
I was living in the region by now, and it was clear to everyone that if you didn't like what the Shah was doing, you couldn't complain about it. His secret police agency was called Savak, and it was famous for torturing people.
One of my students, she was arrested for being a student activist, the sort of thing that here in the United States we would put down to normal student activism.
Michael Matrinko taught for several years in Iran before signing on to work at the American embassy there. One day he went looking for his former student and was told that she had gone to study in America.
I was having dinner with the president of the college, and I just told him, I said, I'm really pleased that, you gave a fellowship to this woman. I said, she was a really good student. He said, she doesn't have a fellowship, she's dead. I said, what do you mean? I asked some of her old classmates, and they told me she was studying in America. He said, that's because her family is afraid to tell people she was executed. She was executed in a Savak prison, he said. She's not in the United States studying.
The Shah defended Savak. He said it was rooting out communists.
We were caught up into this entire world web of East versus West in the Cold War. How much of it was avoidable? How much of it was, unfortunately, eggs that break every now and then as you go along? How much of it was the direct responsibility of one person? How much of it was even known by the Shah? These are issues that people have different ideas upon.
Now, we all knew that the CIA had helped the Shah to organize Savak. The U.S. didn't help Savak torture people, but it did provide the Shah with the equipment to spy on people, and Washington knew what Savak was doing.
I don't think anyone had any serious doubt that that Savak was a very efficient, repressive organization that was quite capable of wrongful arrests, tortures, harassment, and all of these things.
Now, here's Henry Kissinger in 1974 visiting Iran with his wife, Nancy. Kissinger was Secretary of State at the time. To this day, Kissinger defends the fact that the United States supported a regime that was so clearly undemocratic.
I believe that we always have to strike a balance between what we would like governments to be and what is required for the American national interest.
The average American had no idea what kind of balance the United States was striking.
Good luck, Henry. Good luck. Good luck. Whatever you're doing, good luck.
In 1977, the Shah went to Washington to meet the new president, Jimmy Carter. We'd heard the Shah was uneasy because the president was saying that America had to take a stand in the world as a defender of human rights.
He invited the Shah back into his private office to talk about human rights and some of these basic kind of political questions and areas where we were pushing him to open up and to be different and to change Iran.
More than 1,000 Iranians had gathered across the street from the White House to demonstrate against the Shah. This surprised the Carter administration. Most of the demonstrators were students sent to American universities by the Shah's government. They had tasted freedom, and they wanted it for Iran.
All of these people were wearing hoods because they were afraid that Savak would recognize them, take their picture, but were out there demonstrating day after day after day from dawn till dark against the Shah.
The Iranian embassy had bussed in some pro-Shah demonstrators. They were mostly military cadets training at American army bases. President Carter was in the middle of a ceremony with the Shah in the Rose Garden when the pro- and anti-Shah demonstrators started beating one another over the head. The police used tear gas, and soon there was tear gas in the Rose Garden.
Iran is strong, and it is in peace with its neighbors.
I went into the meeting in the White House with them afterwards, and the president apologized for the event, for having it gotten out of control, and then they went right straight into business. The system really didn't want to hear information that suggested that the Shah was not functioning well and that things were building up to some kind of a crescendo.
Looking back on it now, it should have been clear that time had already run out for the Shah. He'd been on the throne for 36 years. He was making small changes to accommodate Jimmy Carter, but it was really too late. On New Year's Eve in 1977, President Carter and his wife Rosalind stopped in Tehran on their way home from Moscow.
By that time, the United States had made its deal with Iran. It was not going to be easy to turn that around. The United States still had no ability, no real capability to go in and protect its own interests. We needed the Shah, and Jimmy Carter very quickly recognized that fact.
But how is it that on the very eve of the Iranian Revolution, the United States seemed so unaware that a key ally was headed for very deep trouble? Maybe it was because America's principal source of information on Iran was the Shah's intelligence service, SAVAK.
When I first met Jimmy Carter before I went over there, one of the first questions I asked him, do you want to continue, in the light of your policy on human rights, do you want to continue the sort of association we have with SAVAK? And his answer was unequivocally yes.
SAVAK told their American counterparts that there was no serious opposition to the Shah's regime. And that was the attitude at the American embassy.
As far as the Department of State was concerned, there was no opposition to the Shah's regime. Everything was fine. Everything was wonderful. Business was good. We want to sell more arms.
That night, the Shah threw an elegant dinner party for his guest of honor. The president read an old Persian poem with clear references to human rights.
Human beings are like parts of a body. When one part is hurt and in pain, others cannot remain in peace and quiet.
But the president also went out of his way to praise the Shah.
We have no other nation on earth who is closer to us, and there is no leader with whom I have a deeper sense of personal gratitude and personal friendship.
Carter's remarks on New Year's Eve made so many Iranians angry. They just thought Carter was a hypocrite. All that talk about human rights and then this anointing of the Shah as America's best friend. They were convinced Jimmy Carter knew what the Shah was doing to stay in power. Nine months later, everything had changed. This is a very famous picture in Iran, taken on September the 8th, 1978, moments after the Shah's troops opened fire on demonstrators at a place called Jolly Square, right in the center of Tehran. There'd been demonstrations against the Shah for months now, but there had never been a reaction like this. The soldiers just lost it. The government admitted to killing more than 80 people here. One woman told us that some of the wounded didn't want to go to the hospital in case SAVAK found out and finished the job. After Jolly Square, Tehran lost it. Thousands of Iranians poured into the streets, and were they angry.
They were the students, they were the sort of the disenchanted middle classes, the poverty-stricken rural people who would come to Tehran. We had all of them revolting against the regime of the Shah together.
Here were the two Irans, the 7th century Iran and the 20th century Iran, together.
I came across the very first religious march that I saw. I saw the whole street crowded with these women in black. The whole street was black. I was even afraid.
In 1979, Malak Kazai was a drama professor who dressed like a hippie and did not cover her head.
And the crowd got closer and closer. And little by little, I just felt ashamed of myself. The slogans were what I believed in: freedom of speech, freedom for the political prisoners, and so on. All of a sudden, I said, could I march with you? He said, why not? Just turn around and put arms in arms with these ladies and started to march. From that day, I understood that there were no lines. Everybody was the same. Everybody was against this big monster that was the regime.
And then, in the middle of all this, something very important happened. This man, an elderly Muslim cleric named Ayatollah Khomeini, who'd been sent into exile by the Shah 14 years earlier, showed up in a suburb of Paris.
Hundreds of Iranian students, pilgrims, came to hear their leader speak, and also hundreds of journalists and dozens of television cameras. Ayatollah Khomeini is kicked out of Iraq, ends up in Paris, and suddenly, ironically, has the entire world's media at his feet, helping to relay his messages back to Iran.
That's right. Given what was happening in Iran, we all rushed to Paris.
The position of the woman under the Islamic Republic will be the position of a human being.
And here was the 7th century cleric surrounded by a group of 20th century Iranian activists who'd been educated in the U.S. or Europe, who hated the Shah, and who certainly understood what an asset they had in Khomeini.
There were two sets of people around Khomeini. We used to call them the turbans and the neckties.
My favorite necktie was Sadek Gobzadeh. He was a romantic about his revolution and deeply committed to it.
What about the army?
We don't care.
What do you mean by that?
I don't think they will dare today to do anything.
For decades, the Ayatollah, which is a title that means reflection of God, had been preaching that Iran should be run by the clerics. But Gobzadeh and others convinced him this wasn't a message that would sell very well to a wide audience, and so this medieval-looking character began talking about women's equality and democracy. Khomeini's neckties churned out recordings of his best sermons in their Paris basement. Back in Iran, Khomeini's messages were heard everywhere. They were very tough, even nasty, and they were aimed directly at the Shah. The old man in Paris had become a symbol of the Iranian resistance. Khomeini did not start the revolution, but the Shah had suffocated all the other opposition. The Shah's regime was disintegrating very quickly now, because people were willing to die for a cause.
Everybody slept maybe 4 hours a day. Telephones rang every second. You organize things.
Perhaps we sometimes thought the Shah could have stopped it with a massive military crackdown. We waited for it, but the Shah hesitated.
He didn't want to shoot his people. My husband always said that I'm not a dictator, I'm a king. I don't want the blood of my people on my hands.
He depended very heavily on the United States for political advice and guidance.
By now, the Shah was calling the U.S. ambassador to see him more and more often.
2 and 3 times a week, 2 and 3 hours a day, and expressing his doubts and expressing his reservations and making clear that he wasn't going to do what everybody was expecting him, or that he would do it only if we would encourage him to do it.
In Washington, the Carter administration was having an identity crisis. Cyrus Vance, the Secretary of State, argued the U.S. could not ask the leader of another country to order a military crackdown on his own people. But Zbigniew Brzezinski, Carter's national security advisor, was sending private messages to the Shah telling him he must use the army to crush the rebellion.
The communications that I would get that were written down telling me what to do were just no human rights violations. Nobody wanted to write anything down which said, yeah, tell them to go shoot the bastards.
We didn't know it at the time, but the Carter administration had decided it was time for the Shah to go. The White House sent Ambassador Sullivan to the palace.
In the end, I was finally instructed by Washington to go around to the Shah and say, by the way, old chap, we think you should leave.
The Shah left at a little after 1 o'clock on January the 16th, 1979. He had invitations to go to Egypt and then to America. The departure was actually broadcast on Iranian television. For the second time in his life, with military officers kissing his feet, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi had no choice but to leave.
My husband was crying. I was trying not to cry. It was very hard when you leave your homeland, where you've been born, on a cold winter morning in an empty airport, and especially more than myself, my husband, who had dedicated his life for the well-being of the people. It was very hard to leave and to think that you would never come back, and I never thought that I would never come back.
The country erupted in celebration.
We won our human rights by ourselves, not by the United States. Jimmy Carter knows that we want freedom, and we don't want his human rights anymore.
I do not remember any other day quite like it. February the 1st, 1979, Ayatollah Khomeini suddenly home. It was the biggest day in Iran's modern history. They drove the Ayatollah from the airport in a white Chevy Blazer. We were in this little van there on the left. There was a frenzy in the crowd unlike anything I'd ever seen before. People tried to crawl on top of our van. They tried to get into our van. At one point, we got very claustrophobic. We wondered how they'd react when they discovered we were an American television team. There were millions of people in the streets. Khomeini could have asked them to do anything that day.
The way he faced the harshness of the regime inspired people. The word that he used more than any other word was mustaz'afin, which means the downtrodden, the poverty-stricken, the people, the real people of this society. He was giving worth and value to these people for the first time. This was what everybody wanted.
2 weeks later, the last of the Shah's military forces surrendered. The crowds poured onto army bases and took over police barracks. They freed the political prisoners and carried them on their shoulders like heroes.
It was scary in those early days because what happened is that the army basically left their barracks and there were thousands and thousands of weapons on the streets. Every leftist or Islamic guerrilla had a gun, and everybody had some fight that he or she wanted to carry out. So the hotel would get shot up one night, the Iranian radio and television would get shot up one night.
It was really dangerous. A friend of mine reporting for the Los Angeles Times got caught in a firefight and was killed just an accident. There was something very personal about the way people abused statues of the Shah. These revolutionaries, and sometimes they were just thugs, rounded up suspected sympathizers of the Shah and suspected Savak agents. You could see on their faces that they knew what was going to happen. A quick trial and a firing squad.
Well, they were scarcely trials. They were quick interrogations. There weren't any lawyers or anything like that.
These are the bodies of the Shah's former military commanders. We call this man the hanging judge, Ayatollah Khalkhali. Hand-picked by Khomeini, he was the ruthless face of the revolution.
We created a court. We took them in one by one, and they confessed that they were guilty.
The executions went on for months. It didn't matter really what your job was. If you had worked for the Shah, the charge was the same.
They'd killed people in the streets. They were mostly like that. Some of them were spies, but mainly they were killers. They'd opened fire on the people of Tehran. They'd killed people, and in retaliation, we killed them.
Ayatollah Khomeini set up his headquarters at a high school in South Tehran. We would go there all the time. And every time there were throngs of supporters screaming for him to appear. It was really ironic. The Shah and his wife had done so much to help women in Iran, but they never got this kind of devotion. But it wasn't long before Khomeini began to rub many people the wrong way. Here's what happened when Khomeini and the conservative mullahs issued a religious order that all women must wear the veil.
They didn't want to be restricted. They saw this restriction coming, and they poured into the streets.
3 months earlier, most of these women had been shouting, "Down with the Shah."
I was with Ayatollah Khomeini, and I always said that our leader is Ayatollah Khomeini, but not now.
Why not?
Because he's against the woman.
This will cut off freedom, everybody's freedom.
I think he's a dictator, another kind of dictator.
Hooligan, fundamentalist gangs appeared on the scene and started attacking the women.
They were still in the throes of the revolution, really. Chaos in the streets. They still had roadblocks set up, sort of neighborhood gangs that would set up these machine gun positions on corners and stop people.
They became vigilante groups that basically tried to impose some kind of Islamic justice. I mean, I remember one night coming out of a restaurant and two guys said they were comité and pointed guns at me and a friend and gave us an alcohol breath test at gunpoint.
By late summer, Khomeini's supporters were still fighting leftists, and there were even armed clashes with groups supporting other Ayatollahs around the country. The American ambassador left the country, smuggled to the airport in an armor-plated Chevrolet. By February 79, the Shah and his family were in Morocco, and while they were there, the White House withdrew its invitation for the royal couple to come to the States.
The Shah told me a mid-level CIA agent came to see the Shah and delivered a message to him that it was not in the best interest of the Shah or the United States for him to come into the United States at the time.
While trying to be loyal to the Shah and his historic relationship with the U.S., our country's interest was in trying to forge a relationship with the revolutionary government.
The state is a cold monster. The United States now had to deal. And unfortunately, that was the position they had to take. The fact that you're an ally and friend of 9 presidents from Roosevelt on, and the most staunch supporter of the United States in the Gulf, it just doesn't matter anymore.
Soon their friend, the King of Morocco, asked the Pahlavi family to move on. Their presence was becoming politically awkward for the leader of an Islamic nation. The royal couple went to the Bahamas for a while, and then to Mexico. In Mexico, the Shah was visited by his old friend Richard Nixon, but there was no direct contact between the Shah and the Carter White House. Then, in the autumn of 1979, President Carter made what turned out to be a very bad decision. The Shah was in Mexico. He had terminal cancer, and he needed to come to the U.S. for medical treatment.
I'd been promised by every agency in Washington. It was almost like I'd asked them a stupid question. I asked, are there any plans to have the Shah come into the U.S.? Oh, come on, Chuck. No, absolutely not. You know, why would we do that?
Carter was the last person to agree to this, and he finally said, all right. He said, you all agree that we should let the Shah back in. But he said, what are you going to tell me when they take our people hostage in Tehran?
And so the Shah was allowed to come to New York Hospital. It was a very tense moment.
How's Shah doing?
He's doing very well. Thank you very much.
And how are you holding up? Excuse me. Good.
When the Shah showed up in New York, it confirmed the worst suspicions in Iran.
They saw all this as proof that we were indeed trying to overthrow the revolutionary government.
There were other things which made the revolutionaries nervous. The U.S. was building the embassy staff in Tehran back up again, hoping that before long, it might be business as usual.
I was assigned to the Central Intelligence Agency. Our jobs were to try to find sources who would tell us what was going on in the Iranian government.
They thought we were trying to do what CIA, Schwarzkopf and Roosevelt had done, Norm Schwarzkopf's dad, had done back in '53. They were genuinely concerned. That had been so emblazoned in their minds, especially the younger people, that if the Shah came into the United States, that was step one.
And then it was reported that Mehdi Bazargan, the fairly moderate prime minister, had met in Algeria with Carter's national security advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski, even been seen shaking hands.
Radicals back in Tehran, however, found out about it, and Tehran radio labeled it as a secret meeting between the United States and Barzaghan to perhaps subvert the revolution.
As the revolutionary forces, we felt very strongly that our country, our revolution, not be threatened.
Ibrahim Askarzadeh was one of a small group of students who began meeting at Tehran University. Their plan was to stop whatever the U.S. was plotting by taking over the embassy.
We saw ourselves as being like the little boy who stuck his finger in the hole in the dike in order to keep it from bursting open so that the townspeople wouldn't get washed away. We felt a duty to protect the revolution.
Because they had to strike back. We'd let the Shah come into the United States. Anyone who had a pulse on what was going on in Iran then understand the frustration the people felt.
The preliminary planning didn't take long. The discussion started 8 days before the actual seizure. The strategy was that with the occupation of the embassy, we would actually be able to halt the meddling of the U.S.
On the morning of November the 4th, without telling Ayatollah Khomeini, the students led a demonstration to the embassy gates.
I was basically doing work. Things are getting noisier outside, but I was writing something I've forgotten what, using the telephone, and looked down and suddenly realized there were lots of people, and they were even coming over the walls.
There were 500 students with us the day we broke into the embassy.
The Marines were ordered to fire tear gas, but not bullets.
There was no way to defend that embassy. Absolutely none. And if we had killed some people, and we could easily have done that in the early stages, then there wouldn't have been a hostage crisis, but there would have been a complete wipeout of the American embassy in Tehran and the entire embassy staff.
The Americans were also nervous and confused and didn't know what to do.
We're still sitting with this, very classified material in our safes, including the names and addresses, phone numbers, etc., of our agents. I'm in the vault at the end of the building, and I'm putting the papers in the shredder. And then we hear the voice of our security chief outside. They had immediately tied him up, and they had him outside the door. And he was screaming through the door to open the door. If you don't open the door, they'll shoot me.
The American hostages were blindfolded, handcuffed, and marched out on the U.S. Embassy's front steps by the revolutionary students. The Iranians had fought U.S. Marine Guards for 3 hours for control of the embassy.
The administrative counselor looked at his watch and said, "Let the record show that the embassy is surrendering at 12:10.
Then I was taken out and could hear the crowd screaming. That was the first time I heard death to America, death to the hostages, the chant. And it sort of sunk in then that, uh-oh, we're being held hostage.
We weren't supposed to occupy the embassy. We just wanted to protest. We didn't think it was going to last long.
And we were just sort of sitting around in various rooms of the ambassador's house with people with arms there, pointing guns at us, yes, but also others coming and saying, "Don't worry, it's going to be over in a little while. You know, you'll all be free in a little while." And then we weren't.
By the evening on November the 4th, the giant U.S. Embassy compound was completely under the radicals' control.
I think they knew by the first night when they called me up for my first interrogation, they knew that I was CIA by then. About 7:30, 8 o'clock that night when I was taken back to my office, blindfolded, and they accused me of being the chief of station, of being the head of all CIA operations in the Middle East, of being the CIA officer who gave the Shah his instructions.
The students went to the embassy like children in a toy store and filmed themselves doing so.
Inside one of the drawers, there are many regular and commercial license plate numbers. I think they use these to chase and spy inside Tehran and outside. With every operation, they would change the plates.
The problem was, the people who took the embassy knew nothing about what an embassy was. They were basically very ignorant about foreign relations, embassies, life outside of Iran. So for them, everything we had done was suspicious or evil.
The first night they took me out for a walk, they said, to get some hava hori, to get some fresh air. No, the fresh air I got was they took me out and let people beat up on me outside, walk me into trees and stuff like that. And when I came back in, the guy that was playing the good guy role in the good guy, bad guy approach said, "You know, I'm really sorry that happened, but you hurt yourself. And the only reason you hurt yourself is because you're not cooperating with us."
Look, they were symbols of the American rule in Iran. Maybe they themselves were not involved in the coup, but they were the symbols of that rule.
I'd never really done a single thing that I wouldn't have been proud to tell the Iranians I'd done. I'd never done anything against them. So I felt betrayed by the Iranians. I felt betrayed by my own government.
In Washington, all the president's advisors had gone to the White House. It never occurred to anyone that the Iranian government wouldn't step in to resolve this. In Tehran, it wasn't that simple.
In the beginning, we felt that we had accomplished something impressive.
Ibrahim Askarzadeh has powerful memories. There he is conducting a news conference in the embassy on the first day of the occupation. Askarzadeh was one of 3 student leaders who were running things inside. Another was Mohsen Mir Damadi. That's the slightly smaller man on the left.
Our main demand was that the Shah be returned because he had committed crimes and should be tried in Iran. We didn't think it would last very long at all. Then the leader of the revolution gave us his blessing.
Khomeini sent his son Ahmed down to the embassy. The students had the place locked up so tight he had to get over the wall on a ladder. When Ahmed told his father what was going on, the Ayatollah said publicly he approved.
If the Ayatollah Khomeini had so much as given us a hint to free the hostages, we'd have done it, but there was no such request.
Looking back, it makes sense. Khomeini was a very shrewd politician. With all sorts of groups still vying for power, this was a chance for Khomeini to reassert himself as the absolute power. When the Prime Minister wanted the hostages released, Khomeini simply pushed him aside.
The civilian government of Iran, headed by Prime Minister Bazargan, resigned today.
When the Prime Minister and his government resigned, the communication between our people and the U.S. became impossible. Our country was cut off from the world.
There was nobody to talk to. And that's the problem we faced throughout the hostage crisis. The pressure was immense on Carter to take some action. He knew that if he had intervened militarily in those first few days, we would have had nothing to show for it except a lot of dead bodies and a potential war against Iran.
The Pope sent an emissary to see Khomeini. Khomeini told him if Jesus Christ were alive today, he would impeach Carter. At the very center of the city, in one square block, more than 60 American and other nationals. Magbar Amrika. In Farsi, it is literally death to America. Not that we ever thought most Iranians meant it. They didn't hate Americans. They were just frightened that somehow the American government would rob them of their revolution. And it gave them some confidence to stand outside the embassy and have this experience in unison.
This is Bob Dyke in Tehran. This is not the only ABC feed tonight, but I think it is the most newsworthy.
Occasionally, the students would release pictures of the hostages. We would all examine them, frame by frame, for clues to their condition. It was very frustrating. We were never quite certain that they were all alive. President Carter finally got angry at the Khomeini regime in public.
The actions of Iranian leaders and the radicals who invaded our embassy were completely unjustified.
For the first time, the president called the hostage holders terrorists.
They and all others must know that the United States of America will not yield to international terrorism or to blackmail.
These students weren't afraid of Jimmy Carter. They detested him personally because they had looked to him as president to sit on the Shahs. And then when Carter went to Iran, 1977 for the New Year's Eve toast and toasted the Shah, their attitude towards Carter just changed 180. And from that moment on, they loathed him.
Teachers brought their students. At home, Americans were so frustrated, and the hostage takers saw this on videotape sent to them by Iranians living in the States.
They would express these frustrations to me. You know, why don't the American people support us? Don't they understand?
We expected that American youth, seeing how they reacted to Vietnam, would be supportive of us. We took no issue with the U.S. as a country. We were simply saying that we had a problem with the way the U.S. treated Iran. We expected Americans to understand this, but it didn't turn out that way.
Over 1,500 demonstrators marched on the Iranian consulate in downtown Houston. One Iranian couple who declared their support for the Ayatollah barely escaped the crowd's outrage.
I think once we put our foot down, you don't see these small countries pushing Russia around. Because they know better. They know they'll do something about it. But that's America. I guess they give the world anything they want, and then they get stabbed in the back, and they turn right around and give it to them again. But that's America. That's what made America what it is today.
The Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat, no friend of America, came to Tehran. Ayatollah Khomeini said that thanks to Arafat's intervention, he would release almost all of the women and most of the black Americans, 13 people in all. He said Islam respected women, and blacks were oppressed just like the Iranians.
We read the number.
The hostage takers invited the media into the embassy for the event. Even though they thought most of us were spies, they had begun to realize that the media could be used. In fact, it didn't take long at all for the whole hostage crisis to turn into one giant media event.
It's hard to describe the carnival atmosphere outside that embassy every single day. There were hundreds, sometimes thousands, of Iranians protesting, demonstrating, screaming death to America in front of the TV cameras. But most of the time, they were just standing around having a good time. There was a circus-like atmosphere. You could buy peanuts and boiled beets or pencils or little American flags to burn. And it was only when the TV cameras started rolling that you would start hearing the screams, death to America, death to Carter, death to Israel. As a print journalist, I would be taking notes, and sometimes the crowd would just punch the air with their fists, but wouldn't say anything because there wasn't any sound.
The Carter administration could not get an American envoy in to see Khomeini, but suddenly Mike Wallace was sitting in the Imam's living room, negotiating.
Imam, would you permit me to go to the American Embassy compound and talk to the hostages who are there?
Okay. Yes, you could.
I can go. He will permit us to go. Indeed, he will give the order.
Actually, the Imam never did let Mike in.
Well, we would like to do that today, Mr. Ambassador, if that is possible. It is now.
We tried too, but we didn't do any better.
Hostages, and when will you release them? The diplomats in any country are supposed to do the diplomatic work, not the crimes or espionage.
Despite his enormous popularity with so many Iranians, Khomeini seemed cold and unyielding to a foreigner. He never made eye contact, and he gave the same answer again and again.
Therefore, it is
the hostage crisis led to a whole new era in diplomacy. The two governments didn't talk to each other. Now they talked at each other on television.
When people behave as a mob, behave as jailers, behave finally as gangsters under international law, they are no longer to be called students.
Carter tries to frighten us on the economic front. He does not have the military courage to attack us. Victory will belong to the people who are sitting on waves of oil.
By now, it was also clear that Khomeini and the mullahs who were in his camp were using this war against the Great Satan, as they always referred to the U.S., as a device to get rid of the more flexible revolutionaries who thought the mullahs should go back to the mosque.
Months and months have passed. The people who joined under the banner of Khomeini were splitting up.
Nasser Manachi, who was arrested last night after having...
The Minister of Education and the former Deputy Prime Minister were put in prison for treason because documents found in the embassy said they had met with American diplomats. The students actually brought in carpet weavers to help them reassemble documents which the embassy staff had shredded.
And then once we became pawns in this struggle between the radicals and the moderates, basically there was nothing anybody could do. We were there until the radicals firmly established control of that government.
The events that took place and the things that complicated the hostage-taking business were partially in our hands and partially not.
By Christmas, the hostages were still inside, and their captors released another film.
A Christmas wish especially for you, Imam Khomeini. Merry Christmas. May Christmas bring you lasting joy and lovely memories.
Just before Christmas, 1979, though he would not say it to the Shah's face, President Carter decided it was time for the man he'd called his close friend to get out of the United States. Next stop, Panama.
We had to rush out of Newark Hospital because they told us that there is no room available and they needed the room for someone else, and for his radiation. It was always postponed because they said they fear of security problems or the doctor is not there.
President Carter's chief of staff was the messenger.
I told him, I said, Your Majesty, we need to ask you to consider going other places now for your medical treatment.
We could not find a country. We were negotiating with I don't know how many countries, and it was virtually an impossibility. Every country we tried for a different reason turned the Shah down.
But General Omar Torrijos of Panama owed President Carter a favor because the U.S. had just agreed to give up control of the Panama Canal.
The only personal contact the Shah ever had with Jimmy Carter during the entire crisis was when Carter called the Shah on the phone just prior to our departure for Panama to thank him for leaving the country and for attempting to assist in the hostage crisis. That was the only conversation the Shah ever had with Jimmy Carter.
The Carter administration had sent everyone they could think of to seek the hostages' freedom, and they were getting nowhere.
It took me about 4 months to realize that it was not going to be over in a few hours or the next day. Every night for the first 3 months or so, I went to bed. I tried to have a clean shirt. I only had 2 shirts. I had 2 pair of trousers, but I tried to keep one of them clean. And I laid my stuff, the few possessions that I had, closely together so that the next morning when they came to take us to the airport, I would be ready to go.
Presidents of other countries, diplomats, journalists, lawyers, many different groups. It was a mess. We had no idea where the real message was and who was the actual messenger. After a while, we felt as if the Americans were holding us hostage.
We now know that at one point Jimmy Carter even sent Hamilton Jordan to a secret meeting with the Iranian foreign minister, Khomeini's longtime advisor Sadegh Gobzadeh. Gobzadeh had come to believe that the hostage crisis had so isolated Iran that Iran wouldn't have any friends if it ever needed them. At the height of the crisis, Jordan and Gobzadeh met secretly in Paris.
He risked his life by meeting with me. I mean, for someone in his position to be talking to someone from Jimmy Carter's White House was a great risk for him.
The CIA disguised Jordan to look like an older businessman. Jordan and Gobzadeh met and talked in a Paris apartment.
You could say he was brave, you could say he was crazy.
Given the mood in Iran at the time, I think he was brave, but as it turned out, overconfident. Gobzadeh tried more than once to get the hostages out of the embassy, and each time he failed. The Iranians were still trying to have the Shah arrested and sent back to Iran for trial. Now they were courting the Panamanians.
I had returned to Panama from the States, and on my return to Panama, I went to the Shah's island, and we were sitting there, and the Shah wasn't particularly well because his health was now failing again. And the Shah had, he looked at me and he says, you know, there's something I have to tell you. And he said, but I don't want you to get excited. I said, what? He said, General Torrijos came to see me. I said, really? And he said, he told me that he was playing with the Iranians. He said, no, he told me that he may have to take a picture of me in jail, just with bars in front of me to show the Iranians that that I'm under arrest. I said, he told you that he's going to take a picture of you behind jail bars. I said, it's ludicrous. I said, it's not going to happen.
Armeo and the Shah's wife convinced him to get out of town quickly and go to Egypt, where he was welcome. President Carter tried to keep the Shah in Panama. He believed it would help the hostages if the Iranians thought there was a chance the Shah could be arrested by the Panamanians and returned to them. The Shah was smarter than that.
How do you feel about the Carter administration in recent days? Are you disappointed?
This is a political question that I'm not ready to answer at all.
We announced that we are leaving. We have accepted the invitation of Sadat of Egypt. If any move is made to stop the Shah, then obviously the entire world should know that Jimmy Carter has sold the Shah out.
Extradition papers were to have been filed tomorrow, and the Shah could have been arrested, but he avoided that indignity by leaving. He's running out of countries to go to, but it may not matter. His doctors say he hasn't long to live.
My husband, you know what made me very sad in a way was he never complained. Of course, there were many moments he was saying why. Why this happened to him.
By now, the pressure on Jimmy Carter was so intense that he decided to try rescuing the hostages by force. The plan was to send in special commandos who would grab the hostages right out of the embassy.
So many of our hopes and fears were tied up in this rescue mission. We were worried about the lives of these people. We were worried about our nation's honor. We were worried about Carter's place in history. We were worried about Carter's re-election. All these things were pinned on the hopes of this rescue mission working.
It was a disaster. The Delta team never got farther than this abandoned airstrip in the desert 200 miles from Tehran. In the darkness, a helicopter and a transport plane collided. 8 U.S. servicemen were killed, and the Iranians discovered the mission. They were very shaken and immediately began moving the hostages out of the embassy.
On this particular day, from about 11 o'clock on, clearly something had disrupted the routine.
There was a lot of activity around the embassy, a lot of people we hadn't seen before. And then that night, summarily, we were put on a truck, prison hoods, blindfolds, handcuffs, the whole bit.
I was blindfolded, taken out and put in a van with about 5 or 6 others, driven through the streets of Tehran and ended up in Avon prison.
And all the way to Tabriz, where I went next, they kept saying, Mozebi Bashin, Mumkin Commando Balaunja. There could be commandos up ahead, be careful. And when the Iranians used the term commando, they were either talking about Israeli commandos or Americans. So they were concerned that there might have been some U.S. troops in the country. They were paranoid about it.
Ended up in a cell that was about maybe 6 feet by 4 feet and very, very high with a little skylight at the top. A solid metal door. One of the Iranian students assured me, however, that I was not in prison. I was just in a prison-like place.
What in the hell were we going to do? I mean, it was a terrible feeling. I mean, we wondered, I think we worried in the short term they'd be killed, but, you know, maybe these people are so irrational and so crazy in their hatred of our country, maybe they'll never let the people out. You know, we didn't know what was going to happen. It's a terrible feeling.
President Carter and his advisors believed they had run out of options. And then, a few months later, the Shah died in Egypt. The King of Kings had been eclipsed by history. The only 2 world leaders at the funeral were President Sadat of Egypt and Richard Nixon. Ironically, it was war that finally gave the hostages some hope.
Strange things have been going on. There have been blackouts in the prison. We were given candles and then told not to use them. The electricity was gone, and then we heard bombing.
In the fall of 1980, the Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein detected weakness in his neighbor's chaos and attacked.
We knew as soon as it started. We were in prison downtown, not all that far from the airport. We could hear the bombs landing.
One of the guards, who had been, particularly unpleasant, came and he started to talk to us, and he said, we may have a problem here in the prison, and we may have to give you guns to help defend the prison. Do you know how to shoot guns? Would you be willing to help us defend the prison? It's like, what?
From the outset, the war was incredibly vicious. Thousands of Iranians volunteered to go to the front. Old men in their 70s, children as young as 13. The children were used to run across minefields to clear a path for the tanks.
I think it gave the Iranian government a firm realization that their isolation was costing them.
It was the Iran-Iraq War that really showed them they had to start concentrating on other parts of their foreign policy, and that they needed friends they could not rely on unless they got rid of us.
The happiest event for some Iranians in that bitter year of 1980 was November the 4th. On the grounds of the U.S. Embassy, they celebrated the first anniversary of the takeover, on the same day that Jimmy Carter lost the presidential election.
The rally, the first actually held inside the embassy compound since last year's takeover, was organized by the militants. There were no votes for Mr. Carter here. In Tehran, he is still the great satanic foe.
Good evening. November 4th, 1980, the election of a president.
The Iranians were desperately looking forward to the defeat of Jimmy Carter.
And they had little radios, and they even brought radios in and let us listen in Farsi to some of the election results.
What do you think you would do if you lost this election today?
Well, I obviously would abide by the American people's judgment whether I won or lost.
But I mean your future plans.
Oh, well, I'm counting on winning.
We knew the day that Reagan was elected, that Reagan had been elected. And that was a big day in Iran with our captors. They were happy that Carter was defeated because they took credit for it.
I don't understand why 52 Americans have been held hostage for almost a year now.
It is, in truth, a Reagan landslide sweeping across this nation tonight.
Most here are prepared to see this day mark not the renewal of Jimmy Carter's presidency, but its ending.
So I can't stand here tonight and say it doesn't hurt.
And I remember specifically when one of the guards came in and said, Reagan is now the new president. What do you think will happen now? They'd seen Reagan movies dubbed in Farsi, so they thought he was a cowboy. So I played along with that. And when they said, what do you think will happen when Reagan comes in office? I didn't say a word. I just went boom, boom. And they said, really?
Thank you all.
And I said, yeah, first day he's in office after the inaugural ceremony, he'll go back to the White House and say, okay, tell the Iranians if they don't let those hostages go by midnight tomorrow night, it's war.
It wasn't until Jimmy Carter lost the election that the Iranians negotiated seriously with him for the hostages' release.
Hi, Connie and Scott. As you can see, I'm healthy and well, so don't worry about me. I'm doing just fine.
At Christmas, the hostages had been visited by Algerian diplomats who were helping with the negotiations.
You could tell it was winding down. The food got better. They were, do you want seconds? They were trying to fatten us up.
Hello, I just wonder if you had any report to give.
The Iranians made President Carter suffer until the very end. He spent the last night of his presidency in the Oval Office, working the phones and waiting in vain for news that the hostages were free.
It became a matter of pride, maybe foolishly so, that we wanted this release when it happened to happen on our watch.
On inauguration morning, in the minutes before Ronald Reagan was to take over, the plane had still not taken off.
Carter called me from the car going up to the inaugural ceremony with the Reagans in the car. Anything happened.
Out on the flight line, things have been prepared for a very long time. All of us in the press, meanwhile, who'd been covering this story for so long, were in Frankfurt, West Germany, waiting for the hostages. They were going to be handed over to the U.S. government in Algiers and then brought to us.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully...
The new president, Ronald Reagan, was sworn in at 11:57 a.m. on January the 20th, 1981.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
And then it happened.
The chief Iranian negotiator has just confirmed that the Algerian aircraft carrying the hostages have left Tehran.
I was the last one that they put on the bus to go to the airport. We remained tied up and blindfolded, in fact, until we actually were taken to the door of the bus. And then the first thing I saw was this gauntlet of screaming Iranians yelling and waving, and so we sort of bolted through the gauntlet and up into the airplane.
The planes bearing our prisoners left Iranian airspace and are now free of Iran.
The guy who took my blindfold off while I was on the bus got real close to my ear and said, "Do you think you can help me get a visa someday to America?"
Frank, there we are. Yes. Everybody was so excited to see them. Colonel Scott in his yellow jacket there. Bill Doherty, the CIA man, getting off the airplane in Algeria. Within days, they'd had medical checkups and were home. The Iranians paid heavily for their revolution. The revolutionary government turned out to be less tolerant than the Shah. They went on killing those who opposed them.
Every morning we used to wake up, listen to the news, and the newsreader would come up with a list of people, 100 people, 50 people, 200 people, who were executed that same morning. So it was our daily wake-up call.
Some of the people they killed had helped them to overthrow the Shah. They finally killed my friend and contact Sadek Gobzadeh. He had risked his life to free the hostages. He was accused of treason. Hundreds of thousands of Iranians died in the war with Iraq. And with the Shah gone, Ronald Reagan felt that he needed someone else to keep the region stable. The United States developed a new relationship with Saddam Hussein.